Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Coakley, and I have the pleasure of chairing this next panel. Um, the topic of our panel is focused on accessing our culture. I come to you from Washington, D.C., where I am the Program Officer for Disability Rights in the Office of the President at the Ford Foundation. I have achondroplasia, which is the most common form of dwarfism. If we were in person, you could tell that, but I'm sharing that by way of part of my description here on the presentation. I have what normally is red hair, but COVID has made me unable to dye it in a number of weeks. So it's a little bit past my shoulders. I'm wearing a bright red blazer, and I am sitting in front of a jacquard patterned bedspread. Um, I'm going to take a moment to introduce our panelists and ask them to describe themselves. And then we will jump into the questions that we've been given. And so our first panelist is Ikponwosa Iro. Ik, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Rebecca. My name is Ikponwosa Ero, and everyone calls me IK, just the two letters. It's easier for most. I am the United Nations Independent Expert on the Enjoyment of Human Rights by Persons with Albinism. I am a woman with albinism from Africa originally. I'm from Nigeria to be particular. So essentially, I am from a completely Black family, but I am as white as everybody else who is Caucasian on this panel. And I have gingery hair, and my eyes are blue, light gray, depending on the lighting. And I currently live in Canada and have been here for a few years. I am currently in an office setting with really nothing in the background but a filing cabinet that looks very nice, by the way. I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Eva Portis Ebenezer's daughter.
Hi, thank you. Yes, my name is Eva Þórdís Ebenezersdóttir, and I go by my two first names, Eva Þórdís. I'm a PhD in folkloristics at the University of Iceland, and I'm here in the middle of my apartment where I do everything now these days because we have been, asked not to be at the university in the recent times. I have very short hair, which at the moment is my spring color of pink. I wear glasses, which are kind of a caramel color, and because it's spring and because of the pink hair, I went out a few weeks ago and got myself a pink lipstick to match my hair. Round apple cheeks, and my cat is meowing in the background.
Well, welcome to your cat. As you said earlier, there is not a panel that is appropriate that does not include a cat at some point in time. And to wrap us up, Majella, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Majella McAteer, and I am from Northern Ireland. I am deaf myself and I use sign language. I have blonde hair at the minute and I have a plait, and I actually am wearing a black polo net jumper. Whilst it may be spring, in Northern Ireland it is really cold this week. It's been 7 degrees. I have lots of freckles on my face and I am sitting in front of a very plain white background, but I'm really excited to be part of this panel discussion today.
Thank you so much. As a fellow freckled person, I send you solidarity. Of my 3 children, the youngest just got his first freckle last week, and we are eagerly excited about the continued expansion of freckled people in our family. So let's just jump right into the questions. And I'm thrilled with what I know, the variety of folks we have on this panel, and I'm looking forward to a really fruitful conversation. So what does deaf and disabled people's culture mean to you in your context? And what has your experience of that culture been like? And we'll kick this off back with Majella.
Okay then, so speaking as a deaf person, I've been deaf all my life and I've been part of the deaf community and deaf culture my entire life. For me, it's where I interact with people and I engage with people so calmly and so happily. And we've so many shared values, we've a shared language, a shared sense of identity. I am so proud to be deaf because of the language that I use. I love sign language. And within Northern Ireland, we have two different sign languages. We have both ISL, Irish Sign Language, and BSL, British Sign Language, which are separate languages. And the reason for that is that a lot of people from Northern Ireland have been educated down in the south of Ireland and learned ISL there, whereas others have perhaps studied in the north of Ireland or gone over across the water. So we have a really rich environment, really rich heritage in terms of the language itself. I went to school in Dublin for my education. I was a boarder there in the school, and my first language actually isn't the one I'm using right now. It's Irish Sign Language. But when I went to study, I moved on to using British Sign Language, and then I use written English as well. So I feel like I'm trilingual. I have three languages. I think what's very interesting about deaf community and culture is that because we have such a strong bond of a common identity, the shared experience of facing those barriers in everyday life, we go beyond boundaries that other people will consider to be there. So in Northern Ireland, as you know, there's a political divide. That doesn't exist within the deaf community. Because we have so many other things in common. We share our heritage, our language, a sense of humour. Throughout COVID, obviously over the past year, things have been difficult. But during that time, I really feel that the deaf community has come even closer together. We've worked together so well. For the briefings every day, the political briefings have actually had two interpreters every day, both BSL and ISL. We've never had interpreters at political briefings ever in the past. So this has been a real phenomenon for the whole of society in Northern Ireland. And the other thing has been the development of remote interpreting services, particularly those related to health, which has been phenomenal, has really helped people and also benefits as well. So remote interpreting services have come about during COVID. And I think in many ways, I see the community more cohesive than perhaps before. Now, the reality is that no matter where you are in the world, sign language isn't international. Deaf people have all developed languages naturally. And I would know with other people, sometimes it can be difficult. I've grown up in a family where not everybody is deaf, and so I've learned to adapt my communication. But sometimes there are challenges. But within the deaf community, we have the opportunity to share sports, and we have our own sports events, such as Deaf Olympics, and that's fantastic. And across Ireland, we would have the interprovincial tournaments for football, which are incredible. And as we know, every year on the Sunday night, there's a massive party where people come together and it's a chance to connect with each other. And of course, we do that through sign language, but it's just amazing. So I hope that gives you some insight into deaf culture.
Definitely, and thank you for that. IK, what does deaf disabled people's culture mean to you in your context? And what does your experience of that look like? IK, I think you're muted.
Of course, there's always someone who begins with that, and there, I did it. So what does deaf disability culture mean in the context of people with albinism? I would call it, and I say I would because we're in an interesting position. We're still forming what that culture means to us, because essentially we are kind of latecomers to the party, even though some of us have been in the shadows or like lurking, if I can say, observing. But in terms of cohesiveness, as you have seen in the deaf community, we're latecomers and we're still forming that. But from what I can observe, there are three aspects to this. And the first is we are beginning to celebrate our uniqueness as people with albinism. And just like the deaf community has a language that binds them, we have, ironically, coloring that binds us. One of the biggest conferences on albinism in the world is in the USA. And it's a room filled with over 1,000 people with albinism from Peru to Japan. And all you can see is white, and usually white to ginger hair in the whole room. And without albinism, you would have seen a diversity of ethnic groups. And so we form a kind of post-racial society, and we're reveling in that, especially with the racial tensions happening now, before we then sometimes go ahead and step into the other impairments we have, mostly visual impairment. So we're celebrating diversity in terms of what the constituency brings into sociology. That's number one. Secondly, we're celebrating disability as diversity. So we're now plugging into the disability movement as a whole, to celebrate the diversity that we bring as people with disabilities together into the social space. And finally, we are also learning to participate in cultural life, and be a part of things that are already happening. Like we have people with albinism going into pageants. Now, this might sound kind of trite, but it's a big deal when your biggest organ, which is your skin, has been the reason why you have been excluded. So we're learning to participate in cultural life. So those are the three main, what is beginning to mean for us to have a disability culture. But my experience with that culture is as follows. So like I said, it's been formed, and we are trying to understand how we should be perceived, right? And a lot of that has come with the help of the human rights framework. One of the advantages of coming late into the game is that we are able to rely on the CRPD. But I should point out that it has not been easy, because there has been a lot of struggle in society about understanding albinism as a condition that has a disability, or that is a condition with a disability. So a lot of what I've been doing in my position is giving the human rights frame, as using it as a key to understand the CRPD with albinism. I think is an excellent example of what disability is. So I have been establishing that people with albinism are living disability because of their appearance. This lack of pigmentation in the skin is a disability, but it is also, interestingly, a source of racial discrimination. So I have been underscoring the intersectionality of albinism, because also we have the visual impairment aspect. So the disability aspect is on the coloring, it's on the vision, and then also this aspect of racial discrimination. This is important because there are a minority of people with albinism who have some level of pigmentation, who have almost no visual impairment, but yet because they look lighter in the family, they are still discriminated against, and in some countries they are killed for this appearance. So my experience with our culture growing in this manner is I'm seeing now the shift, thanks to human rights, from fascination and mystification into a humanizing of albinism, and people telling their own stories, using, of course, the human rights context, which is very empowering language. Human rights is an empowering language, allows the person to speak for themselves. And we are seeing people with albinism going into industries that are considered mainstream, such as modeling, and using that to tell their stories. A lot of magazine articles, op-eds, people using to tell their stories. So we are still, I would say, we're still at the early stages of forming this culture, but I'm beginning to see the traces of cohesion that you find in other well-established disability constituencies, in taking pride in who they are, in participating with other disability groups, and then ultimately in participating in the culture itself.
Thank you so much, IK. So much of what you said about the visible presence of albinism. As a little person, I very much relate to that, and walking into the shock or the excitement that happens when you walk into a room and it's been set up for your community. And like, people always laugh because they can tell when there's a little people convention, because we sit on the floor everywhere. Like, everything is a chair. Like, we sit on the floor because chairs don't work for us, our legs fall asleep, so we sit on the floor. And so the number one thing we look for hotels for our conventions is like a good lobby. Like, is there a lot of floor space that we can sit down? And I remember explaining this to hotel staff and being like, they're like, we can bring in more chairs. It's like, no, we're just going to sit on the floor. No, but we'll have tables. No, we don't want that. We don't need that. Like, we'll sit on the floor anyways. You'll waste your time. So it's always interesting hearing about the commonality of different movements and really how much shared culture there is across all of our different spaces. Eva Porvis, do you want to share with us your response to how the culture looks to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I just realized that I'm, because Zoom kind of makes my disability not visible. So I just realized I didn't describe my disability in the beginning, but I have a physical impairment and I'm born different. I'm born with my body that doesn't conform with what most people see as normal. And I might come into it a little bit later today. But it's my left leg. So in Zoom, it doesn't show, you don't see me walk, you don't see me stand or anything such. Also, I told you that I'm a folklore student, but I'm basically a disability folklore student. And a few years ago, I came up with the hashtag #disfolklore to use on Twitter, because I saw this history and stuff like that, and I wanted something for me and what I'm doing as well. So this folklore and this folkloristics and a folklorist right here, a disabled folklorist, a disability folklorist. And that is not for me only an academic identity, it's also a cultural one. Because of course my field of folklore is all about culture. And it's so funny that with folklore things intertwine so much with just your everyday life, and then having a knowledge to actually analyze your own everyday life. So when it comes to what disability culture means to me, I think it's very layered, and everything that the others have said so far, and you have all said, absolutely. And it's so layered. It's a question of everything from the moment you wake up in the morning and the way that you present yourself, the way that you have your own traditions of how you present your relationship with your prosthetics, if you have prosthetics or such things. I could tell you stories. Did I freeze just then? But I'm back. So yeah, just like I think one of my favorite things that I still have to explore on the academic level is this connections that we have with our prosthetics, which I think is fantastic. I mean, do we name our prosthetics? My husband's wheelchair is called Ísleifur, which is a very like grand Icelandic name, and he is definitely the third person in our family. So we have personified him, the chair, very much. So I think that for one thing is a very important part of disability culture, but just tiny little aspect that comes from everyday life. And then through my studies and in the last few years, I found one of my absolute favorite quotes is, it's a quotation from a small text by Tanya Titskowski and Rod Michalko. And they say, whether we recognize it or not, the life of a disability is both a story that we live and a story that we tell, and it is surrounding us. And I absolutely love this. And it brings me to another very important, both personally and professional aspect of what I see disability culture to be. It is all the stories that we tell. And sometimes we're telling stories very consciously. We put up a stage, we might be doing a stand-up, or we're like very specifically, we might be in a doctor's office or talking to somebody, having an interview, and we're very consciously telling a story. We're telling our story, and it has different connotations, a different context. But we're so often telling our stories without realizing that we're telling a story. Just to the people that we meet, to friends we meet somewhere for a cup of coffee or whatever, we're telling our story. And there's so much we can do with those stories. It's how we respond to the question, why are we the way that we are? This is a question, why are you like this? Why are you like this or that? It's a question that we dread and we hate, most of us, I think. But we all have a toolbox of what to do, how to respond to these questions. And in essence, we can say that that toolbox is full of stories, and it might depend on the context, who is asking. Is it a child or an adult? Is it somebody who stops you on the street, or is it somebody you are getting to know? What kind of context is going on? And we tell different stories. And I think if we realize the power of storytelling, we could change even more than we're doing. We can change so much with these tiny little elements in everyday culture of just being who we are, presenting who we are, and telling strong, powerful stories, having those tools and knowing when to use what tool. I hope this is making sense.
This makes complete sense.
I could go on, but this is one of my absolute favorite, and this is the one thing. I mean, I have of course loads of things that connect to my PhD and my work as well, but this is like on the personal level, the stories that we're always telling, consciously or not consciously.
That's so powerful. Thank you so much for that, Ava. My friend and colleague here in the States, Alice Wong, often talks about telling our stories as sharing our sort of superhero origin story. Like when you get asked, like, why are you like that? Or, you know, why do you feel the way you do? Or like, what drives you? It's like, oh, let me tell you my superhero origin story. You know, and I think that there is, as you mentioned, there is such a power in that storytelling. And so I want to ask your colleagues on the panel, I want to ask Majella and I want to ask IK, how do you all see, because Ava touched on it a bit, Ava Porras touched on it, how do you see disability or deaf culture represented in other forms of culture, like folklore or mythology? IK, do you want to go first? Or Majella, do you want to go first? You started.
I'll go now, if that's okay. Question 2, is that right? Yeah, I think we're on question 2. Yeah. Yes. If that's the right one, then I'll go with that. Brilliant. Okay. So, sorry, I just had some notes here. Let me just make sure I'm ready. I have tried to think through this, and I can't actually think of any specific examples of where deaf people are represented in folklore. I haven't come across any. It's not something I've any awareness of. However, in thinking through it, my reflections would say that across the world, deaf people do have their own culture. And I think sometimes, for example, when we look at the impact of Gallaudet University in the States, I mean, it's just created such an impact worldwide. When they had the protest to have a deaf president installed, and I. King Jordan was brought in. When we had the deaf president brought in to Gallaudet University, I think the world sat back and took notice. And in the south of Ireland, we have Deaf Village Ireland, which is an incredible place. It brings together so many different aspects of people's lives in one place, which is just amazing. Now, having said that, deaf people are still experiencing so much discrimination around the world. But I do think that, you know, we are working through these things. We are becoming stronger, becoming advocates for ourselves. And what we need to strive for is the legislation that will enable people to flourish within their own language. That hasn't happened. And if you think about across the world, there are so many people who have information in different countries, and there are some great examples of good practice. There are developments ongoing. Things are happening. And I think that deaf people are starting to work through these things and get a better quality of life. So I hope that answers. Opportunities are developing for us, but I think the lack of legislation around our language has probably held us back.
Well, that's such an interesting question about, you know, what comes first? Does cultural change come first, or does policy change? And can one feed into the other? That's something I find myself thinking a lot about in terms of the fact that the US has still not ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. But we see representation in culture and folklore in so many different ways, and thinking about like how much does it take, like how much will it take globally for each of our communities to get the level of representation that we really deserve. IK, do you have thoughts on this topic?
Yes, but maybe that the $1 million question you asked, I don't have comments on that about culture versus policy, but because of what I mentioned earlier about being late in the game for people with albinism, we have pursued both tracks at the same time, trying to change the culture and trying to change policy at the same time, partly because we were desperate because of the parts of the world where people were being killed for having albinism, but also because if you're late, you try to do everything you can to catch up. In terms of this question of how this constituency has been represented in folklore, unlike the deaf culture, we have been overrepresented in movies and literature. In fact, people have done PhDs about this topic. And my theory is that there is a general fascination by the human race about coloring because we all have come from cultures that have been to some extent racialized or have racialized others. And so it's interesting with albinism, just like other racialized or colored people, if I can say, our disability touches as well on this racialized past and present. And it's very important when we dissect our disability culture to also factor that in, not only because of the social impact that that has, but specifically because the rights and privileges have and still continue to be distributed on these grounds. So it's very interesting if I go to the store with my mom or my sister and they are followed. Yeah, this used to be more common in the past. It's getting better now. And I am not followed, or I get like 4 customer service people trying to help me out. It's even worse now with COVID. I get a lot of help because the mask is covering my African nose and my African mouth. So people see the hair and they see the eyes, and everybody wants to serve me. And I can see the difference because I knew how I was treated before masks and now. And I think it's kind of funny, but also sad at the same time. At the end of the day, we human beings, we create our reality in very fascinating ways. But I would say that in terms of the actual representation in movies, there was a study done by an American researcher in 2014 that analyzed 121 movies that came out of Hollywood, and over 85% represented the character with albinism as evil or as a ghost or as well, how do you say, as aliens. So yeah, and of course the appearance was the focus, yeah, because nobody also knew that most people with albinism have low vision and are legally blind in the US. So most of these evil tropes would be shooting guns, driving cars, which most of us with albinism cannot do. And so essentially you can tell that it was more of a fascination with the exterior and no idea about who the person was or how the condition was, and there absolutely no interest in that. And that's how you know it was more of a attitudinal issue. It's more of an issue of discrimination. They want to use you but not know you. And so part of our pushback in developing our own constituent culture now is responding to those tropes, writing letters to filmmakers to reverse movies in the making as well. Also, people with albinism have contributed to that, even though they've represented only about 10% of the characters with albinism. Oftentimes it will be someone without who is painted. So we have our own white face. So unfortunately, many people with albinism don't know about the convention or the human rights approach. So some of them have also accepted some of these evil roles in the cases when they are hired to fulfill them. And then finally, as I mentioned before, another culture where we are represented is in the racialized cultures. So for example, in Black Lives Matter or cultures, civil rights battles against racial discrimination, many Blacks with albinism feel very tense because they feel like in the Black culture, which they all are very proud to be a part of, they have not been included adequately, and in some cases have been physically abused. So there's a lot of tension. I received some reports recently during the George Floyd protests, people saying, I want to protest, but who am I protecting? The same people who leave me out, but yet I am a proud Black person. So there's a lot of tensions. And as somebody said earlier, it's a complex issue. And we're just, as people with disabilities, as complex as every other person when it comes to our culture and all the concentric circles of influences.
IK, that answer is really powerful. You know, as being from a disability culture that is often has a lot of fetishization, has a lot of voyeurism, being a little person, and just sort of we deal with the same thing where, you know, our community's first gathering was in Hollywood, was during the filming of Wizard of Oz. And as you know, trope worthy as Munchkins are, our community wouldn't exist without that beginning. Like I have friends who can trace the dwarfism in their family back. Like it's a big deal to be able to say, oh, my great grandparents met on the set of the Wizard of Oz. And like, that's a thing of pride, even though it's like, but we don't want to perpetuate sort of those infantilizing stereotypes. And, you know, while we continue to see Peter Dinklage held up as the greatest little person actor on the face of the planet, he's another cis white heterosexual dude. And, you know, where the African American, where the Asian American, where the Latino little people actors, and, you know, they're stuck dressing up as like a bag of marijuana in a stoner movie or something like that. And so there's still so much work that needs to be done, I think, in terms of media representation across all of our communities. And just the tendency to label us as either, to stereotype the characters that our communities play as either evil or you know, less smart, or, you know, angry because we're disabled and we're out to like take over the world. I think all of those things sort of play out across our spaces in ways that there really needs to be a lot more work done. So let's go into, how do you think knowledge about deaf
Rebecca,
and yes.
Can I say something about that second question?
Yes, please jump in.
That second question is basically my PhD. But I really loved listening to all three of you talk about and how you respond to that particular question, because I can tell you all that I can find, I don't necessarily have them in the back of my head, but I can find very clear folkloric representation of all of you and all of your societies. It's all there, it's somewhere in there, absolutely. And on top of that, what really interests me is that what you're all saying about how your communities are being presented in modern day culture, whether it is movies or history not that far back or something like that. My work is about 19th century Icelandic folktales and legends. And the reason why I find it so not just interesting and fun, because it is interesting and fun, but it is really, really important as well to go back to the past a little bit, because I have a clue to where we got to where we are now with those stereotypes. Not necessarily enough to talk about it here and now, but that is basically what is coming out of research the way that I'm doing. So I'm looking at older material and I'm seeing ableism in it, and I'm seeing ideas that are still there and shouldn't be because they're old-fashioned. I'm even seeing ideas in old folklore that I wish we wouldn't have lost, because there's some empowering, powerful stuff in there as well. And that is another thing, that because the fact about the set of the Wizard of Oz, oh my goodness, we have to be able to go back in time. It doesn't matter if it's a few decades or a few hundred years or 1,000 years. And we have to remember that the knowledge at each time is the knowledge of each time. And we cannot, as modern people, deem that knowledge to be inadequate. So we can't take our modern our knowledge today and say everything was horrible in the past. I'm not saying that everything was roses. Absolutely not. There were definitely bad stuff happening. But when I hear disabled people say this to me, everything in the past was horrible. Disabled people were killed, beaten, marginalized, and I'm like, well, yeah, we still are to a point, and it wasn't all that black and white. It is just as multicolored as today is. It's just as complicated as it is today. It's just different. But we need to be able to go back and look at older material, old stories, history, to be able to see and understand how we got to where we are. And not the least, if we want to keep developing those ideas and fighting and changing these ideas that you all three have been mentioning. So thank you very much. I thought I was going to have a hell of a time trying to respond to this question because it is my PhD in its entirety, but now you gave me a way to respond, which thank you.
I'm going to ask that we all get an autographed copy of this when it comes out.
It's going to be articles. I'll send you links when the articles come out.
Please, I think this is really powerful. And I think, you know, your point about multiple generations and how learning changes over time, like, how do you all think that knowledge about deaf and disability culture transfer among generations? I mean, I know, like, both my parents were little people, and of my kids, my daughter just came in and I couldn't convince her to come and like poke her head in and say hello, so darn on that. And two of my three children are also little. My husband's average height and our youngest is average height. So I say that I have high expectations for him. Like, I hope he could go in the world and like change light bulbs or like be a duster. And when I say that to non-disabled people, they get really offended. They're like, why are your expectations so low? And I'm like, well, what am I going to do with this average kid? He's got like these long arms and these legs. I don't get it. But how do you all see knowledge about our cultures transfer across generations? And Majella, you kicked off the last one. So I think on this one, we're going to go to IK and then you, and then Eva Portis.
Sure. So how do I think knowledge transfers across generations about disability culture? I think this depends on the values that are underpinning the particular culture, broadly speaking. So for instance, if the culture is more conservative, like in Japan, I found out that their conservative, their mainstream culture is conservative and values uniformity. And so over time, they would do anything they can to make sure you fit into the mainstream appearance. So people with albinism, even today, have to dye their hair black to be admitted to school or to be employed, if they're lucky to get employment. So this is one of the ways they've passed on their attitudes towards this particular form of disability. And also, same thing we see in African cultures, and I use that loosely. In several communities across the continent, there is a philosophy called Ubuntu, which means oneness, and it's very beautiful. When it's explained, you think, oh wow, you know, this is the idea of the nobility of our ancient origins and all that, and it is beautiful. But Ubuntu, in my opinion, is functionalist, is ableist, because it's essentially based on you are going to help me and I'm going to help you. It sounds loving until you are not able to reciprocate that love when the time comes. And so this is one of the reasons why people with disabilities in general have taken so long and still continue to struggle in that region in terms of being accepted. It's not an issue of hate, it's just this functionalist value that is masked by language of love. In the US, I think diversity is becoming a value in the last couple of decades. And in that regard, that's why it's not surprising that disability culture is improving there more than many regions. And you are seeing more featured people with disabilities in prominent roles and even in beauty magazines and all that. And we're seeing a lot of models now, more and more, with various types of disabilities or impairment. So I think the value is what helps to transfer how people view a disability, the value of the culture as a whole. But I think how it can particularly change is through like a concentric circles of people. So the person itself, like we as individuals can change how disability is looked at across generations, the family as a unit, and then leaders of the culture, such as chiefs or shamans in some cultures, the community itself, and then industry. But finally, thankfully, I think nowadays we're breeding a new form of leaders. These are influencers, social media influencers. We have, typically dry jobs like mine becoming influenced as well because of social media. We have celebrity, and I think this technology is now becoming one of the ways of passing on disability culture, or changing it positively across generations in a much more accelerated way than in the past.
Definitely. Ava, do you want to go next? Ava Portis?
Yeah, in a sense, maybe I have already answered how I think it goes. It's through stories. And like I said in the beginning, the very, very important thing that we tell our stories, and it's always the fight to have non-disabled people actually hear, not just listen, but hear and kind of take in our stories and really understand them, or at least try to understand. We can maybe not ask them for much more than listen, hear, and try to understand. But I was also thinking, so the important thing I think is that, like with modern culture, because we can tell the empowering story, a movie can tell a very ableist story. So we really have to be able to tell our own stories and really have to push those forward, both on the very personal level and as well as a bigger level. And part of that is like what I was telling you about my research is, it's what I'm doing is not only about learning the past and stuff like that, but also I'm sometimes asked about this also, is like, why is, okay, it's interesting, but why? And I still have to find really a way to get activists to see why what I'm doing is important. And I want to give you an example, if it's okay. So in Icelandic pregnancy lore, there is this idea that if a pregnant lady sees a seal, a mammal of the sea, this mystical being with almost human eyes, she stumbles upon a seal, and it can be in the sea, it can be on land, it can be dead or alive, whatever, just a pregnant woman and a seal, they meet up. And what happens? The magic of the seal, the mystery of the seal is imprinted on the fetus, and the baby is born with a body that in some way is reminiscent of the seal's body. In the old pregnancy lore, and this is my research, this is not a very nice thing to do, because it results in marginalizations. It results in stigma, because all of a sudden this baby with a different body is defined and marked by nature and supernature. However, when I saw this first time in my undergraduate, this example of pregnancy lore, the first thing I did was take up the phone, call my mom, and say, "You did see a seal when you were pregnant with me, didn't you?" And she was like, "What?" Then I explained the whole thing, and she was like, "Absolutely, I must have. I just don't remember." So in an instant, me and my mom had kind of retold this story, this example of pregnancy lore, turned it from an ableist example into an empowered example by taking it and claiming it. But we can't claim the stories if we don't know them. So I think that's this kind of getting in touch with the stories, and I feel like I'm starting to sound like a broken record about stories and stories and stories, but stories are just so important. And so whatever story we are telling, as soon as we realize that we're telling a story, we start framing it, we start shaping it, we start really using it. And I think that is one of the most important tools in getting the knowledge and having it kind of slowly, and almost like we have a volcanic eruption here in Iceland right now. So this is like lava moving, not very fast, but nothing will stop it. So I think that's the way I see this knowledge go between the generations. But it can be bad if we don't take control of it. So let's be a lava.
let's be. I think that could be a hashtag for. So if you're watching this panel in a few weeks when it airs, and you want to talk about it, use the hashtag be a lava. There you go.
Yeah.
Majella, do you want to respond to the question about how you see this knowledge transfer across generations?
Indeed, it will, absolutely. And what I find interesting is that within the deaf community, we have traditionally in the past met up because we went to the same school, we went to the events together, but that is now changing. There is no question about that. Because the reality is that there are less deaf children nowadays going to deaf specialist schools. Most of them are mainstreamed. Now, we are finding other ways of connecting, but it's not the same. We still are deaf. We still have the same sense of culture and values, but the ways that we are expressing those, I think, is changing. Research would indicate that 90% of deaf children are born into families where no one else is deaf at all. That has a massive impact. And those deaf children and people, sorry, let me just check what I'm saying there. Those deaf children grow up to be adults, and it's so important that they do get access to information about what it's like for people in previous times to be deaf. We need to treasure our heritage. We need to find ways of putting that out. Just to be clear, humor within deaf culture is very different from wider mainstream culture. It just comes out a different way. It's expressed a different way. And that needs to be passed on. It's crucial. So people need to meet each other to do that. And that is how we do develop such a rich experience of life, when we have those moments of sharing and comedy and humor. And we need that. So it still gets passed on where people come together. And at present, I think what we tend to do is take technology for granted. We're all chatting to each other as we are now from cameras. In the past, people used to write letters, and the stories we have are it would take 2 weeks to get that letter because other people had the phone, even all those years ago when the phone was a different animal than it is now. People still had, wrote letters, but nowadays we have mobile phones, we have video cameras sitting on our phone, and we can connect so quickly. And yet, I still think it's really important to think back to the stories of the past. So, for example, if a deaf tradesman wanted to get up at a certain time in the morning, quite often what he would do is tie a string to his big toe, thread it downstairs, through the letterbox, and into his neighbour's house. And then his neighbour would pull that in the morning. That would wake him up and let him know that it was time to go to work. Then we had flashing lights waking us up in the morning. And now we have vibrating phones or alarms under our pillows getting us up. So technology changes over time. But what we need to do is ensure that the new generations coming through have access to education about the way life has been. And just last week, we had an experience where some young deaf people came together, and they were looking at some information about the past, about how deaf people used to live. And we talked about this device called a Minicom, which was a text phone based on typing out English. Most of them had never heard of this in their life. They didn't know what it was. And so the community now is engaging a different way, for perhaps in Facebook. A lot of changes that are going on are technology based, and yet we've so much that we do need to pass on about who we are. And I think that is the challenge moving into the future.
Well, and Michelle, I think that's such an interesting point. I remember my first job in Washington, D.C. I was organizing a group of young people with disabilities from all over the US, and I had to fight with our human resources department to let me download AOL Instant Messenger on our computers. And our HR staff were like, well, it's just so you young people can just like chat at each other all day long. And I had to explain, no, I have deaf young people on this project, and I also have blind young people on this project. And this is the first time that they can communicate instantaneously with each other without having to go through an interpreter or a relay service. And she was like, well, what do you, and it just, her brain couldn't wrap its head around the fact that like, no, we weren't sitting there like sending like poop emojis back and forth. Like we were actively like doing the work. And the technology made it easier. But I do agree with what you said too, though, because I mean, I even find within the dwarfism community, people don't know our history. You know, within the broad disability community, as things stop being written down, as there stops being like hard historical evidence and material of these things, people lose that connection to the past and the history. And I think that that's really important. We're coming up on our final question, and I'm really excited because I'm very curious what you all will have to share with this. But what are the aspects of deaf and disability culture that you all would most like non-disabled people to learn about? And I think for this one, we're going to switch up the order. And Ava Portis, can you go first?
We've always been here. I know it sounds simple, but the thing is, disability is a modern concept. But people with differences, people who have been defined as different from the norm, have always been there. And I think if we can get that across, we can start changing some things that haven't been changed yet. Because I think the idea of disabled people as this one homogeneous, well, not, of course, not homogeneous, but people kind of think about us as a homogenic group. I mean, we don't have to go very far that group doesn't exist. That there was very little or even any idea of a group consciousness of disabled people as a whole, or even as smaller communities with things in common regarding their bodies. It was just individuals that were different. And I think if we can get that across, get that history, like you were just saying, we need to know the history. And the thing is, we are all over history. It just needs somebody to go in and look for it, because we are not in the obvious places of history. But I can tell you, we are all over it, because as I always say, disabled people are everywhere. Disability doesn't ask about gender, class, all of these other things. We are everywhere. So we're not like marginalized in terms of where we are located. We are basically everywhere. And the same goes to history. And I think if we can really get that through to non-disabled people, that we have, just as them, always been there, some things will start to change. So I think in a simple nutshell, what I want them to know is we have always been there and we're always going to be here.
And more of us are joining every single day.
Absolutely.
I love that one. I'm like, we're coming for you.
Yeah, we are. We're going to take over the world.
Eventually. IK, do you want to jump in on what you'd like non-disabled people to know about deaf and disability culture?
Sure. So I would like everyone, particularly people without disabilities, to know that disability, deaf culture are actually human culture as well. And even though we name it to identify its unique aspects, the truth is, if we were to draw a diagram of cultures, there would be a huge overlap between disability and deaf culture and human culture. Why? Because culture is a complex phenomenon, and it's very nuanced. And even though we tend to want to simplify everything as human beings, and you can see that more in terms of political trends across the world, this drive towards populism and all that, is we seek simple answers. We want things to be simple, because to understand the complexity calls for more responsibility, and most people don't want that, especially when they have other stressors in their lives. But the truth is, we are a human culture, as has been said by my colleague, that we've always been here, and we have been influenced and are influenced by things that other people are influenced. We're women, we're Black or Asian or whatever culture we have. We also have our particular conditions. So there's enough ties that bind us together. And there's also enough for us to recognize our differences and to celebrate those differences. And related to that, I would want to underscore the need for listening to one another, because this is something that is also getting lost. We want to simplify, we don't want to listen. Listening to one another, like what we've had here, has been excellent. I have learned a lot, and I'm sure that our listeners too have learned a lot, because at the end of the day, the narrative about our culture is partly objective, but also partly subjective. So explaining about our own stories and then listening to one another is part of the subjective, building the subjective components of culture. So I would urge those two to let's listen to one another and listen to disability culture, but also understand that really it is human culture at the end of the day. So yeah.
Thank you. Majella, to wrap us up, what would you like to add?
Well, in response, what I would say is that I think it's time for society to move away from the medical model. It just is. The medical model is all for us about what is wrong with this tiny little ear on the side of my head. And really, that is not relevant. Society should be about acknowledging who we are as human beings, how much we have to contribute, about ensuring that we all have the same rights and nobody is different. We need legislation for sign language that will enable that to happen. And for us, that is so key for our culture to be acknowledged and for us to be effective parts of members of society. As deaf people, we want to be seen as a linguistic minority. That's who we see ourselves as. It's our language. We're all about our language. And I think that within society, people who don't have any sense of having a disability just see us as people with broken ears and not having a language. And a couple of quotes that I'd like to finish with would be, deaf people can do anything except hear. Anything. And that was from King Jordan, who I've referred to already, the Gallaudet president. And the second quote is, my deafness was never a tragedy. Never. It's just a different way of living. And that was by Christina Hartman. But in conclusion, what I really want to leave us with is that sometimes I think people feel that, if you are born deaf, then, you've got to pick up on the medical intervention. We want deaf children to have access to a language from birth that will enable them to be as much a part of society as everyone else. Thank you.
This is all so powerful. And I think one of the things that I continue to think about and ask myself is, if this panel took place 10 years from now, what are the groups that we would see at the table, and what's the kind of conversation that we would have? And I think one of the things that's sort of gone unsaid in this moment is that, the coronavirus is going to fundamentally shift who counts as part of the disability community going forward. I mean, I think here in the US alone, we're talking about at least 10 million newly disabled people, because we know 1 out of every 3 people is going to have a long-term disability as a result of it, including deafness and brain fog and mobility impairments and cardiac and respiratory issues. And when we have this conversation 10 years from now, what will the COVID generation of the disability community have to say? Will they identify as part of us? How will culture reflect this time in history globally? And how will folklore adopt this? Will we see comic book characters developed that have long haul COVID, or are impacted by the coronavirus in other ways? And I think that's one of the things I continue to say, and very much like what you heard on the panel today. I'm from a community where they've discovered our gene, and they're actively, rapidly working to get rid of us. And I keep saying, every time you think you're going to get rid of us, like 10 new conditions pop up. It's part of our slow global takeover strategy. But I really do think, thinking about how we see our stories reflected within our communities and externally, and how can we continue to find means, motive, and opportunity to take control of those narratives and ensure that the narrative that comes out at the end of the day is one that focuses on our strengths, on our assets, on our humor. Majella, you made a comment about deaf humor. I've had 3 deaf bosses, and they had some of the most ridiculous senses of humor ever. And I try to tell their jokes in other places, and people are like, what? And I'm like, no, it's really funny. It's really funny. Come on. And they're just like, no. But that's the beauty of our community. And I look forward to continuing this conversation beyond today. I wish we could all be in person, because I would say, let's go to the pub after this and sit down and continue telling stories across our spaces. So until then, I bid you all good day. And thank you to the interpreters. Thank you to the CART staff that have been so helpful. We appreciate you. We couldn't do this work without you. And everybody have a wonderful afternoon.